Good evening. I'm Roger Mudd in Washington.
And I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After tonight's news summary with the cost in lives mounting, we examine the U.S. military role with the UN force in Somalia. Next, a profile of the man President Clinton thought too valuable at Interior to put on the Supreme Court, Bruce Babbitt. Finally, our panel of editors from around the country assess the results of the Clinton budget victory.
Major funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. And by New York Life, yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The U.S. and NATO allies agreed today on a plan to bomb Serb targets in Bosnia. The blueprint for such attacks was drawn up by the ministers from the 16 NATO countries holding emergency talks in Brussels. In Washington, Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell called it a good concept and said U.S. forces were more than ready to do their part. NATO ministers held off giving an immediate go-ahead for the airstrikes, which would be ordered jointly with the United Nations. At the same time, in Bosnia, Serbian troops began withdrawing from some strategic mountainside positions outside Sarajevo, but they remained on another peak which they'd promised to give up to help reinvigorate Geneva peace talks. We have more in this report, narrated by Louise Bates of Worldwide Television News.
A crisis meeting of NATO chiefs in Brussels discussed the crucial question of military action against the Bosnian Serbs. For Bosnian Muslim President Izetbegovic, the option was a slender chance for survival. Bosnian Serb leader Karadzic, though, merely an exercise in NATO self-justification.
NATO should be disbanded and dismissed, and that's why they found raison d'etre in threatening Serbs.
The Bosnian Muslims are demanding the withdrawal of Serb troops from the mountains overlooking the capital, Sarajevo. The Serbian withdrawal from Mount Bjelasnica was completed on time, with UN troops ready to take its positions. But there was no word of a Serb pullback from Mount Igman, an area heavily mined by the Serbian war machine. But NATO has the firepower and now apparently the resolve to ensure Sarajevo is spared. In Italy, US Air Force muscle just a skip away from the war zone, and in Brussels, a dramatic NATO announcement that Bosnia's agony must not continue.
NATO is ready to act. There should be no doubt about the firm determination of NATO and its member nations to act against those responsible, so that the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council are respected and the suffering brought to an end.
Werner stressed the United Nations must have the final say and ultimate command.
A critically wounded 5-year-old Muslim girl left Sarajevo for emergency treatment in Britain today. Her doctor said the evacuation may have come too late to save her life. The girl, who has severe shrapnel wounds to her spine, abdomen, and head, was taken on an inflatable stretcher to a British transport plane. She was wounded 6 days ago in a mortar attack that killed her mother. Her doctor blamed UN bureaucracy for preventing earlier evacuation. Roger?
General Colin Powell said today the United States will beef up security for its troops in Somalia. His pledge follows the killing of 4 U.S. soldiers by a landmine Sunday in the capital, Mogadishu. The deaths brought to 12 the number of American troops killed in the country since they arrived last December. This morning, General Powell told reporters in Washington the U.S. may retaliate.
In light of the incident the other day, we'll be showing greater care. We will have to undertake some more security operations, and obviously we are interested in going after any of those who are responsible for the incident if we can find out who they are.
United Nations officials had blamed the attack on the forces of fugitive warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, but he's denied responsibility. We'll have more on the story right after the news summary. A U.S. diplomat was killed last night in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. He was identified as 45-year-old Fred Woodruff, a regional affairs officer. Woodruff was shot once in the head by an unknown assailant. State Department officials would not say whether they believe the attack was related to the country's civil war. The shooting took place outside the capital, Tbilisi, while Woodruff was on a sightseeing drive accompanied by one of Georgian President Shevardnadze's bodyguards. The bodyguard was not hurt. Woodruff had been on temporary duty in Georgia and was scheduled to return to the U.S. in the next few days.
President Clinton publicly celebrated his budget victory today. The House and Senate gave the plan final approval by hair-breadth margins last week. Mr. Clinton flew to Charleston, West Virginia, where he attended a rally on the steps of the state capitol. He said the debate had been more partisan than he'd hoped, but those who voted for the plan had helped bring change to America. Senate Republican leader Bob Dole said his party was ready to work with the president on upcoming legislation, but he said it would be easier if Republicans could make changes in proposals early in the process. We'll have more reaction to the budget battle from around the country later in the program.
The Clinton administration announced new rules today for the regulation of western lands. They include a doubling of the monthly fees ranchers pay to graze their cattle on public land. Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt said the new policy is a reasonable balance between the need to sustain the health of rangeland and the need to sustain the economic health of rural western areas. Republican Senator Conrad Burns of Montana said the higher fees would drive smaller ranchers out of business. We'll have more about Secretary Babbitt and the new policy later in the program.
Officials in Venezuela today said the death toll from Tropical Storm Brett had reached 150. The storm hit the country's northwest coast early Sunday. It dumped up to 5 inches of rain on the region in just over 7 hours, triggering mudslides and washing out roads. 500 people were injured. About 5,000 were left homeless. The storm later weakened and moved offshore. Forecasters expected it to cause little or no damage by the time it reached Central America. That's it for the news summary. Just ahead in the news hour, a deadly ambush in Somalia, a man of the great outdoors, and Main Street's view of the budget bill.
We focus first tonight on the U.S. and United Nations military and relief operation in Somalia and whether the rising American casualties might jeopardize the mission. Yesterday, 4 American soldiers were killed in Mogadishu when their jeep hit a landmine. Since May, more than 20 Americans have been wounded in sniper and drive-by attacks. UN and U.S. officials blame most of the attacks on the forces of the local warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. 2 weeks ago, the Clinton administration sent Ambassador David Shin to Mogadishu to assess the American mission, and he joins us tonight from the State Department. Also with us to discuss the Somalia mission are Bernard Traynor, a retired Marine Corps Lieutenant General and now Director of the National Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, Noura Ahmed Gurey, Director of the Somalia Relief Project for the Center for Health and Development, and Joël Tanguy, General Director of the French relief organization Doctors Without Borders. May I begin with you, Ambassador Shin? President Clinton has said there will be an appropriate response to the killing in Somalia. What do you think he means, appropriate?
It's important to keep in mind, Roger, that any response to this attack on the 4 Americans has to be a UNISOM or a United Nations response. It will not be something that we unilaterally will dictate. We are in discussion, always are in discussion with UN headquarters in New York and with the people on the ground in Mogadishu. We will have to look very carefully at the facts of the particular problem that took place on Sunday and decide where to go from here. I think it's premature to say precisely what we're prepared to do.
Do you assume, does the State Department assume that the killing was in fact the work of Aidid?
That is the assumption we're making. I would note that the one denial that was referred to, I believe, is one that came out of Nairobi from Aidid's supporters. We don't know much about those people. We don't know who they really represent. There really are not very many alternatives in South Mogadishu to an attack of this nature other than Aidid's forces itself.
There was a statement Sunday after the killings from the United Nations that said that the killings reflected Aidid's frustration over his shrinking base. It sounds like it ought to be just the opposite, if he can do that with impunity.
Well, one must keep in mind the situation in Mogadishu. You're talking about basically a low level of urban guerrilla warfare where the advantages lie to the people who inhabit the urban area. As luck would have it, the UNISOM complex, the U.S. mission operation, the port, the airport, Virtually all of the non-governmental organizations are located in South Mogadishu. They always have historically, which means they're located right smack in the middle of ID'd territory. He therefore has an enormous advantage. His supporters live basically across the fence from where all of the UNISOM forces are located, and it's very easy to lob mortars in or to create difficulties or to plant landmines.
UNISOM is the acronym for United Nations in Somalia, is that correct?
That's correct.
When I introduced you, I mentioned that you had just returned from a fact-finding mission to Somalia. What facts did you find out that would be pertinent, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, we traveled all over Somalia, and I think the important thing to keep in mind is that enormous progress has been made in most of Somalia. The exception, of course, is in South Mogadishu. We traveled to 4 different locations outside the capital city, north, south, and central. We found that starvation has ended in Somalia. That is no longer the problem. There is plenty of food. The emergency feeding program is going to come to a complete halt this month because there's no longer any need for it. Banditry continues to be a problem in some areas, but it's far less of a problem than it was when American troops arrived and other troops arrived on December 9, or indeed when UNISOM took over on May 4 of this year. So there has been significant progress. Even at the political level, district councils are being stood up. There are semblances of regional and district governments being created. So if you can get outside of South Mogadishu, one can see a considerable amount of hope for Somalia. Unfortunately, all of the attention is focused on South Mogadishu, and there the situation admittedly is not good.
But just listening to your answer, if you've whipped the food problem and the aid problem, why are we still there? I thought that's why we went in there in the first place.
Well, in a sense, you're right. When UNITAF, that is the American-led part of this operation, went in on December 9, the goal was to create conditions which would permit the safe transport of food and emergency supplies in the southern part of the country. That has been done. However, when the UNISOM mandate began on May 4, the mandate expanded enormously, which was to include essentially the standing up of a new government of Somalia, the creation of a civil service, the creation of an educational system, the reconstituting of the economy. This is an enormous mandate that was laid upon UNISOM, on the UN, and I don't think people fully understand the complexity of it. This is a very difficult thing to do when you still have clans that are competing or indeed fighting with each other in Somalia.
Let me turn, Mr. Ambassador, to our other guests, to Ms. Gure. Do you think, you're Somali, are you not?
Yes.
Were you born in Mogadishu?
Yes, I was born and raised in Mogadishu.
And raised. Do you believe it's time for the United States, number one, to reassess the mission, or number two, even to consider getting out?
If you asked me that question, I think a few months ago I would have said that, but I think U.S. shouldn't be leaving Somalia now or abandoning it, but the mission needs to be assessed or reassessed. I think we are drifting away from the first goal or the first mission, which was strictly a humanitarian intervention. And now we are seeing and enforcing, really even almost killing people, and I think in the name of humanitarian mission. And I think we need to reassess it.
Is there any justification in your mind for the military operation that the U.S. has undertaken?
I think at the beginning, I think it was a good thing to do to save those lives and the millions who were starving. But now I think even the relief people are confused about it. We don't know what the goals are. We don't know what they are doing. It seems that millions of money have been spent only in Mogadishu. I will challenge this gentleman from the State Department to tell me specifically what the UN has done from the north or the other regions that you had mentioned, especially in the north and northeast. Everything is being really confined in the capital, and nothing has been done so far.
Do you have an answer to that? Ms. Gure has said she wants to find out what you've done outside of Mogadishu.
Yes, I do have a response to that. I would point out that if she's referring specifically to the Northwest, to Somaliland, she's quite right. Very little has been done up there, except for the fact that UNISOM has established a zone office in Hargeisa, the capital. Nothing has been accomplished that far north yet, but that is not an area of starvation and never was. The original goal was to put an end to starvation. That has been done throughout the country. And I would argue that throughout the southern part of the country, and indeed into the central parts of the country, not only has starvation been brought to an end, but there are some efforts to stand up local governments, as I indicated, and there are initial attempts now to get the economy moving again. As you will find in the local markets in places like Baidoa and Bell at Wayne, the markets are now functioning again.
In Boston, General Bernard Traynor, may I ask if you think this is another example of the wrong place, wrong time, wrong army?
No, I think, Roger, we have to look at the reason we went in there. The country was in anarchy, and there were people that were starving to death and being killed by the bandits, and the military were able to do something. So we went in there and restored the order, and as you've already heard, the lines for food distribution were opened. This was a proper role for the U.S. military. It's a proper role for the United Nations. The job hasn't been done yet, and I think it's legitimate for the United Nations to include U.S. forces to remain there. I don't think there's any merit in pulling American troops out because we had 4 troops killed. Now, that's very unfortunate, and I'm sure that their families are in terrible anguish. But to do so would be very similar to pulling the policemen off the streets because there are muggers out there. It just doesn't make any sense.
Would you assess for me the military operation, the military part of the mission? Has that been as successful as the other half?
Well, initially it certainly was. We went in there with sufficient power and sent the message that we would brook no opposition. And if you will recall, last December, Adid and the rest of the warlords there stepped out of the way and welcomed us there for fear of being blown away if they didn't. But then after the UN forces established themselves there, there was a certain erosion of credibility, and I think a basic mistake was made in June when the Pakistanis were ambushed, and we didn't go in and get a hold of Adid, and I think we're paying the penalty for that now.
One of the generals on the ground there, Thomas Montgomery, said that it's very hard to run an assertive operation in Somalia because everybody's so worried and nervous about the press reaction, the critical press reaction that followed the July 12th attack.
Yes, I think that's true, but those are the terms under which military forces operate today. The all-seeing eye of television is everywhere, reporters are everywhere, and you simply take that into account when you do your planning. But if something has to be done, you certainly shouldn't allow the press in some way to interfere with carrying out a legitimate mission.
In New York, Ms. Tanguy, do you think it's time now for the United Nations and the U.S. to get out of Somalia?
Well, the decision to get out of Somalia for the United Nations and the U.S. is a political decision. As a member of a humanitarian organization, I would have a hard time answering that question. However, I should like to highlight that a commitment was made in December that cannot be dropped right away without a semblance of alternative to be provided. And what that means is that there was a commitment to rebuild the process to a political reconciliation, as well as fulfill the humanitarian mandate while providing a military security environment. This commitment was made in December. If we get out of Somalia today, right away, I would be afraid of the consequences. It would also undermine the credibility of the UN or the US. But this is my personal opinion. As far as a humanitarian organization is concerned, we're more concerned about how it operates versus why should it be operating. This decision is political.
What would the consequences be if the mission were withdrawn?
For the moment, the mission is not doing very well.
It's not doing very well.
It's not doing very well in the sense that we're all concerned, and I think I will represent here most humanitarian organizations, about the path it has taken into an escalation of violence. If that escalation of violence needs to continue, if the marginalization of both the humanitarian and the political reconciliation in the city are to continue, then I would have a hard time choosing one against the other. But what I'm really hopeful is that in the process of evaluating whether we should stay or not, we should not drop to conclusions too early, but really do this process of evaluation. And in the process of evaluation, see the weight that the humanitarian, political, and military forces should have in driving the mission.
Ms. Gouray, do you think that the United Nations and the United States in Somalia is paying too much attention to Aidid?
Absolutely. I think so, and we can easily marginalize Aidid. Aidid is not, I think the foreigners and the people outside don't understand that Aidid represents a whole group. It's not only him, it's all his clan, it's the SNA or Somali National Alliance that he is representing. So if they can marginalize, not arresting him or hunting him, but just inviting others to represent, the clan, so the clan won't feel that they will be alienated or have been really ignored. So I think we are paying too much attention to Aidid, but we should be dealing with the development, reconciliation. We should be really helping the grassroots meetings that are going on, especially in Somaliland. The UNISOM has been ignoring it, the grassroots actions that people are trying to help themselves.
Mr. Ambassador, does the United States regard Aidid as a political leader who is capable of negotiating, capable of governing, or do you regard him as a two-bit rogue?
Well, I wouldn't characterize him in either category, Roger. I think that Aidid was a person at one time with whom we could and in fact did talk and discuss. Everything changed on June 5 of this year when his troops, we believe, attacked in a premeditated fashion Pakistani peacekeepers, people who were there to try to bring Somalia back to the community of nations, and killed 24 of them. That then made Aidid something of an outlaw, and that changed the entire equation. Up until June 5, there was enormous progress, even in Mogadishu.